What's good, gang? It's Ruben again. We're here with day 12 of our Bible in one, and we're going to be going through chapters 35 through 38. So we know, like in the previous chapter, Levi, Simeon slaughtered the entire land of Shechem, and it caused a lot of division in the land against Jacob, and Jacob's reputation is ruined at this point. And so a lot has happened, and this is where God is like, okay, I got to do something about this. So he sends Jacob over to Bethel so that he can make an altar to him there. At this point, Jacob is not playing any games, and he tells his entire family and household, we got to get rid of the idols. We got to get rid of every single piece of idolatry that we have and throw it away. We see Jacob taking God more seriously, and he's starting to purify himself as well as his family. He proclaims that it is an important duty for him to build this altar just because of how much God has been there for him. And so getting rid of their idols means that they're starting a whole new life. Yet they buried them under a tree instead of actually destroying them, because when you do stuff like that, it causes people to want to dig things up, and wherever that place is, at that point, it was cursed. And they probably buried them just to come get them later. Who knows? And so this is where we see Jacob's neighbors have the terror of the Lord over them, because while Jacob is traveling through the lands to get to Bethel, everyone's afraid of him, more likely because of what happened in Shechem with the massacre. And so they finally made it to Bethel, and this is where Jacob renames the place Bethel, which means house of God. And he even names the altar that he built to God El Bethel, which means God of God's house. And so God blesses Jacob after he got rid of all his idols and set up the altar, and even renamed him Israel, which means he just needed reminding of who he was in God. And we see again, God calls himself El Shaddai, Almighty God, the same way he spoke with Abraham prior to this. And God again tells Jacob and his family to be fruitful and multiply, like he told Adam and Eve, and even Noah. I believe this could be a symbol that God is making Jacob, Israel, a new creation. When you separate from your past, God takes you on an exodus and gives you a new identity and standards. I even found it kind of funny how it said God went up, which is more likely to say that he went up the stairs that's kind of known to be in Bethel. So I just thought that was cool. So Jacob sets up a pillar as the altar the same way he did before, when he first saw the stairway to heaven. This time he actually offered wine to God, and it was one of the first wine offerings that was ever given to Yahweh. And of course, he also poured oil on it too, to separate it as an altar for worship. This is when he renames the place Bethel to solidify that this is indeed the house of God and that his identity is here. And so they're on their way back home, and as they're going through Ephrath, unfortunately, Rachel dies due to childbirth. And this is why we're reminded of that curse that Jacob said when he was talking to Laban, that anybody that has stolen your items, let him die. Rachel ended up dying in Bethlehem, which is actually the birthplace of Jesus. So where death happens, sometimes good can come out of it. Rachel ends up naming her son Ben Oni, which means son of my sorrow, and that represents that it was a sad time. But Jacob, wanting to redeem his son's name, named him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand, which gives a more hopeful type of attitude. We know that Jesus is the right hand of God, which means he is the righteousness, the justice, and the authority. I thought it would also be nice to share that Jacob set up a stone in honor of Rachel, and it's just because he loved her so much. I thought that was pretty nice. And then just had to be someone to mess up the whole moment. Reuben, Jacob's oldest son, ended up getting freaky with his stepmom. And they just said Jacob just knew about it and was like, meh. It was like he just didn't care. He had no care for it at all. Of course, Reuben would do this after his mom died. He probably wouldn't have done it if she were still alive. Reuben defiled his father's marriage bed. And as I was reading in the Philemon app, it said that he tried to replace Jacob as the head of the household. And then it just goes on to the verses of naming the sons of Jacob, like as if nothing just happened. And the wives and concubines of Jacob had these many sons. Leah had Reuben, Levi, Simeon, Zebulun, Judah, and Issachar. Rachel had Joseph and Benjamin. Bilhah had Dan and Naphtali, and Zilpah had Gad and Asher. And right after this, we see that this is the death of Isaac at 180 years old. Jacob and Esau ended up burying their father Isaac the same way Isaac and Ishmael buried Abraham. Now we're on chapter 36. This is just a big old genealogy of a lot of Esau's descendants. Now I know what you're thinking, because we're going to be going through a lot of that in Leviticus and Numbers. Why? Why do we have to read all these names? Well, the importance is that the descendants and all of these genealogies give a record of all of these people that were part of not only the tribes of Israel, but of every part of God's family. It was simply part of the culture and how the Hebrews communicated with each other, what lineage they were part of, what tribe they were part of. It was kind of like guys talking over sports and different things like that. It also showed what kind of honor and what kind of family you were held in. So if you had a family that had a whole bunch of sinful people, that's how you're going to be known. And so back to Esau. Esau is also named Edom, and Edom is where the Edomites come from. And so they cause a lot of trouble for the Israelites later on in their story. There is a lot of relative rivalry here in the Old Testament, and that just continues on and on and on because people just don't know how to get along. We see Esau had married so many Canaanite women, including Ada and Oholibama. I know that name is so weird. I don't know who thought of that was going to be a good name for a daughter. But anyway, it is just an issue because we saw that Isaac and Rebekah had a lot of problems with these Canaanite women back in Genesis 26. Esau had left to Seir because he and Jacob could not both be sustained in Canaan with everything they owned. They just had too much wealth. This town ain't big enough for the two of us. All right, all right. I know that was very random, very corny, but we're just going to get back into it. And we see in verse 24 of chapter 36 that there is a man that found the hot springs with his donkeys while they were grazing. So you see little stories here and there as you're reading the genealogies, but also it's important to know that these names have meanings and that these families had certain occupations that made them famous. So reading this, it's a lot to go through, but once you get through it and actually get to know the stories of these people, it's pretty cool. We also see here that the Israelites ended up getting invaded and ruled over by Edomite king. I believe this shows the importance of the reason why Esau's descendants are even named here. We see in verse 35 that Hadad defeated the Midianites at Moab, and that some of these stories are actually in future tense, so they speak on historical events that already came to pass in the time that these books were written. The Midianites ended up becoming allies with Israel in Exodus. And they do that through Moses because his father in law Jethro was a Midianite. Outside of it, it showed that they were being given the land as they moved back in, kind of similar to what would happen in Exodus when they eventually come through the promised land. And so now we're in chapter 37. We're seeing Jacob is finally back home and the introduction of Joseph the dreamer. Joseph is the first son of Rachel, and he is a shepherd, and he ended up actually snitching on Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher while he worked with them because they were doing something that was wrong. And we see Joseph has got the favoritism down packed because Jacob loved him. He fell in love with him because of his old age. And we see that happen a lot even in our society, that younger siblings ended up getting better treatment than their older ones. Kind of like grandbaby. To top it off, this man's even gave him a nice little Gucci coat. Like, bro, come on. Joseph's brothers hated Joseph to the T. Joseph is not really helping the situation because he ends up telling his dreams to his family, and the dreams represent them bowing down to him and he being the ruler over them. Now, I know, of course, this causes a lot of commotion in the family, and even the father rebuked him and said, "What do you mean by that? That we're going to be bowing down to you?" And this makes his brothers furious with him and even more jealous. He was only 17, so that's part of the reason why he was arrogant and immature. But Jacob still wondered what these dreams meant because he knew he had dreams too. And so I'm going to finish this story of Joseph in another video. It's going to be a lot shorter, but I do not have enough time to be able to share everything that I want to share. But I just pray that you guys enjoyed this really and have a blessed day.